Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to friends joining from different time zones. My name is Zeenat Reza Khan from University of Wollongong in Dubai and the NIWG Center for Academic Integrity. I have the immense pleasure today to welcome you back to the third episode of the Academic Integrity Conversations Vodcast series, a joint collaboration between our center and the university. The purpose of this series is to bring you intimate conversations with key stakeholders in academia in topics of academic and research integrity from around the world. Today, I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues and friends, Professor Mustafa Yunus, Dr. Ted Purinton, Dr. Stephen Wilkinson, and Ms. Vidhi Sharma. I'll take a minute to quickly introduce all our speakers. Professor Mustafa Yunus is a prominent figure in education policy and research, holding a professorship at Çanakkale Smart University, Turkey, and leadership roles including President of the World Education Research Association. His career features international roles such as a DAAD TÜBİTAK professor in Germany and a visiting professor in the UK, highlighting his dedication to global academic collaborations. Professor Yunus's research plan spans educational policy, philosophy, curriculum theory, and the impact of AI on qualitative inquiry, with notable publications and editorships with Springer, Routledge, Bloomsburg Publishing. He earned his M.Ed. and Ph.D. from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, respectively. Beyond his own research, Professor Yunus contributes as an editor and curator of significant works in education, emphasizing evidence-based policy and progressive education methods. Welcome, Professor Yunus.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
We have with us joining online Dr. Ted Purinton, who is the founding dean of the Sharjah Education Academy, a capacity-building initiative to improve educational outcomes in the Emirates of Sharjah and influence educational policy and practice in the Middle East and North Africa region. Previously, Dr. Purinton served as Senior Education Advisor for the Economic Development Board of Bahrain and Chief Executive of the Bahrain Teachers College, Associate Provost, Senior Internationalization Officer for the American University in Cairo, as well as Dean of the Graduate School of Education, among others. Dr. Purinton has served on multiple governing bodies and has consulted on a wide range of educational organizations and governments on issues ranging from organizational restructuring to teacher professional development, university budget allocation, tertiary system redesign, and so much more. An absolute pleasure to have you back with us, Dr. Ted. Our final expert on the panel is Dr. Stephen Wilkinson, an associate professor and director of research for Faculty of Engineering and Computer Sciences at the University of Wollongong in Dubai. Dr. Stephen Wilkinson's extensive background is highlighted by his PhD from Imperial College London in the analysis of complex nanomaterials. Having headed the Smart and Sustainable Cities research cluster here, Dr. Wilkinson now leads the research for the faculty, where he infuses the program with rigorous research practice, improved evaluation strategies, and enhanced access to grants and funding, driving faculty success through measurable outcomes. His efforts in fostering an environment of academic excellence and innovation has in fact earned him the Passion Award 2023 at our university. With a broad spectrum of research interests from sustainability to environmental awareness and a rich history of academic and professional roles globally, Dr. Wilkinson is shaping the future of smart and sustainable urban development. Welcome to the conversation, Dr. Wilkinson. We are also excited to welcome in the conversation Ms. Vidhi Sharma, who is an instructor at the School of Business at UOWD, currently pursuing her PhD in marketing. Vidhi has a demonstrated track record for teaching successfully at the tertiary level, with over 7 years of experience in delivering courses on digital marketing, marketing strategy, integrated marketing communications, consumer behavior, Australian business law, and business ethics. Beyond her current passion as teacher and as a PhD student, a mother of 2, Vidhi is also founder of a talk series called Walk the Talk, where she invites industry experts to provide insights on how classroom concepts are translated to industry practices. So glad to have you here, Vidhi. The theme of this session has been curated to reflect the kind of conversations, concerns, and practices that we have seen and experienced in the last 14 months. A new era is really upon us. We are still a bit uncertain, but we are heading towards uncharted territories, with the infusion of generative artificial intelligence in our classrooms at unprecedented rates. never before thought of areas of concern that go well beyond assessments and exams, undergraduate and postgraduate students, to have implications actually even for doctoral students. I begin with you, Professor Yunus. From the perspectives of your various appointments, such as the President of the World Education Research Association, WERA, and research expert at the European Commission, can you discuss how generative AI is currently being integrated into doctoral research practices across various disciplines?
As you indicated, so many ways. It transformed the whole doctoral programs. And sometimes my doctoral students, they don't tell me about how they use it. You will probably inform us about the new developments. Every day it's changing.
Yes.
It's very difficult to follow up to what's going on in terms of use of different varieties of artificial intelligence in education. I can give you a few examples.
Sure.
Last summer, we organized a doctoral research summer school on qualitative research in Warsaw University. And we had students from 26 different countries.
Right.
And we have professors from 6 different countries. And the idea is to teach students how to use qualitative research methodologies. But 60% of the discussions were on artificial intelligence. Yes. Last 2 days, I was with Ted. I was in the Charge Education Academy. And then the topic was educational improvements. And as far as I remember, almost all sessions we talked about artificial intelligence.
Right.
As you can see, now artificial intelligence is becoming very important, a core topic in all aspects of the education and research. Not particularly in education science, but all sciences.
All sciences.
Yes, of course. Right. I can give you another example. 2 months ago, I was in Hamburg University. We were doing a collaborative research with the different parts of the university. And several doctoral students came from the informatics department, bioinformatics. I know that you're from informatics. I was surprised. What's bioinformatics?
Right.
And they said that with artificial intelligence, now we need engineers in medical schools and biology departments. What they are doing is that they are developing an artificial intelligence to generate the 3D dimensional perception of amino acids. Yes, and they said that it might take 50 years to complete the whole mapping of amino acids, but with artificial intelligence, a month.
Wow, look at the time gap.
And then I searched some information about the use of artificial intelligence for protein and biological issues. And then I found a news about DeepMind. DeepMind was able to create the 3-dimensional mapping of whole proteins.
Wow.
Yes, in the world.
Wow.
Yes. And what are the results? One of the results is that they were able to find a cure for malaria, a better medical. Yes. Amazing. Now they are using for the cancer treatments.
Amazing. That's fantastic.
Now
so what
we will solve many issues in a few years.
Can be solved.
Cancer become a regular disease.
Yes. What I'm hearing is, of course, we're concerned that's why we are talking and every platform that we get, but the positive impact on research particularly, and where you're thinking in terms of the scholarship of research, the kind of social impact that research is going to have is tremendous because of the artificial intelligence, generative AI. So if we speak particularly about doctoral students, what kind of immediate impact have you observed in them in terms of the way they're approaching research, creativity, learning, in areas of, let's say, methodology, data analysis, generation of new knowledge, critiquing literature review, for instance?
So many. For instance, last week, my students made a presentation about his doctoral thesis, the first early stages, and then he used so amazing images. I said, where did you find these images? And of course, artificial intelligence. It's very basic one.
Right.
The speed of publication is growing so fast that you cannot imagine, because artificial intelligence is helping us to analyze the data that we were not able to analyze
before.
Yes. For instance, in one of the projects that I'm working with my doctoral students, we are developing a new school evaluation model based on big data and artificial intelligence. what we are doing is that we are generating longitudinal data from schools. And
Wow.
we are merging with the cross-sectional data from OECD and IEM.
Oh,
In order to do this, in the past, we need to have at least 200 doctoral students.
yes, doing
Now-
this kind of analysis.
Now, so easy.
Because
There are many
you
opportunities.
mentioned speed of publication.
Yes.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I'll tell you from what angle I'm asking in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness.
We were talking about it before we start these conversations. I think when I was a doctoral student, there was no such requirement. You just need to do your PhD, write your PhD thesis,
Yes.
be mature, be wise about the academic processes. But now, if you don't have 4 or 5 social science citation-based publications, you will not be able to get an assistant professor position.
Correct.
There's a big pressure on doctoral students in academia. I'm very sorry about that. Particularly if you look at the big philosophers, for example, Gadamer,
Right.
one of the biggest philosophers in the history, German philosopher. He wrote his the best publication at the age of 60.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you need to mature, you need to grow, you need to learn the methodologies, the way
Right.
to analyze and understand the concepts. But now,
So,
publication, and we discussed that British government did a really impressive work on the analyzing the quality of evidence.
yet.
They generated indicators. Based on these indicators, they are checking every single publications published in education in social science citation journals, whether they did a conflict of interest statement, they did a financial statement, if they have,
Right.
they clearly indicated the methodology and the use of data, and
Right.
if it's accessible, the open science, it's really related to open science initiative. When you say that, there are so many publications, but now the governments are more focusing on the impact, the issue of impact,
Yes.
and the quality of evidence. This is
Quality
very
of
important.
evidence. Because I think that would be the concern, I'm guessing, the area of concern for doctoral students, is if they're just about using the technology to increase the speed and output, what are they really retaining from that process? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are the future scholars who are going to be innovating and taking us forward.
I think we are going to change the notion of academia soon and the nature of publication.
Oh,
Because
that's
now
interesting.
I'm currently editing a Sage journal special collection on artificial intelligence, and the main editor of the journal sent me a message. Should we say 7 months for accepting submissions? I said, are you serious? In a week, the concept that is published in the article is getting
Yes.
not useful anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes, by 7 months, we don't
need
know what's going to
change
happen to the
concept
technology.
Yes, because
Absolutely.
publications needs to be published in a different concept and different way,
Way.
and it's going to transform the journals.
More
soon.
succinct, more visual, more capturing the
And
impact
instant publication.
in instant publications.
Publish it
Absolutely.
and yes.
Okay. Now moving back to a little bit of the challenges that you touched upon, associated particularly with generative AI. And we know there are quite a few, like the biases in the training data, the hallucination that it does, and leading to inaccurate information. How would you, in your various capacities, particularly as editor, curator for journals and edited volumes, approach the evaluation of manuscripts if they were submitted by doctoral students? Like, what would be the primary concern that you might have?
First, privacy of data, privacy of information. This
Right.
is going to be a serious issue. Now we are facing this issue
Already.
with social media.
Yes.
Think about, yes.
Everything is out there.
The European Commission's restrictions on Google and Facebook and others.
With GDPR and
Yes.
all those rules.
And we should be aware that it's all our own data, and
Correct.
we have to be very careful about what we are sharing and what not sharing. It's also in academia, in the research studies.
Correct.
I think we need to be aware that the use of data and the analysis of the research data in artificial
Yes.
intelligence, training
Yes.
artificial intelligence itself, that's a big issue.
Big issue. The copyright concern is a big issue.
Copyright concern, my private information is
Yes.
used as a source for training the artificial intelligence. Therefore, we need to create new standards and new procedures, responsible use policies to have to deal with data in artificial intelligence.
And I don't think we are there yet with those kind of practical frameworks and accessible guidelines.
Institutional review boards has to deal with it.
Right.
Yes, it's going to be a very hard topic.
Very hard topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so having understood a little bit of the pull and push of artificial intelligence, Dr. Ted, I'm going to move to you at this point. Particularly as a founding dean of a premier institution that looks to train pre-service and in-service teachers, how do you envision the integration of generative AI tools into a doctoral curriculum? Particularly if you're thinking of the opportunities and challenges that you might foresee in equipping them to effectively use these tools in their teaching and research endeavors.
So, I would think of this mostly in terms of hiring faculty and the kind of faculty and scholars, teachers that I would want to bring into my institution as not only people who are doing the teaching and research, but are representing the interests and the vision and the beliefs of the institution. And I think I'll just start from the most basic level, which is the fact, as we all know, that by now, that people who are facile with AI tools are going to be more effective in their work. They're going to be more efficient. Indeed, as was just discussed a moment ago regarding speed, of course, there's a lot that can be lost in a quicker process. But in general, human production will improve rapidly by those who understand the tools, can use the tools, are able to integrate them into their regular work lives. And I just an interesting example of a book I'm reading right now. It was co-authored by a well-known economist, Tyler Cowen, and ChatGPT. It's called Greatest of All Time Economists, and it's a survey of economic history through economic scholarship. And it's fascinating. I'm reading it in part because I like the topic, but in part because it's interesting to see how a book, not only which was co-authored with ChatGPT, but then is read within it, so you can actually interact with the text. And that's just one example. And I was just thinking about this today as I was putting the final touches on a paper I was writing. What will happen over the next few years in terms of doctoral programs' ability to equip people with that level of skill, and really mostly how to get past, I'd say, some of the kinds of levels of shame or that we see with the use of it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, people hiding the fact that maybe they used AI to help produce something, when in fact most scholarly communities are welcoming it and giving very good protocols on how to identify your use of artificial intelligence. It reminds me of, long time ago when Wikipedia came around, and despite the now widely acknowledged ability for Wikipedia to provide reliable data, reliable information, perhaps with lower incidence than the internet as a whole on most topics, there still is a stigma. And we need to get past those sorts of things in order to say that this is not just a crutch in doctoral education. It's not just an add-on. It's not just a fancy little side skill that you can demonstrate, but it is actually something that will be part of normal life and should be part of the doctoral education of all doctoral students.
I think so fascinating. Quite a few things that you touched upon, and I really liked the what you said about the stigma of it all. And I think it's not just students, but also teachers who feel the pressure. Should I, shouldn't I use it? Should I acknowledge that I have used it? And I think it might reflect on the kind of, the research that they end up doing and the kind of output that they might be having. So along that thread, considering these ethical complexities and the potential for the transformative change brought about by Gen AI in education, what strategies do you believe doctoral programs should implement to ensure that future educators are not only proficient in using these technologies, but also equipped to address ethical dilemmas and promote critical thinking in their own classrooms?
I think it's about the models of evaluation that we use in doctoral work. And I say that from the perspective that for now, probably a decade and a half, elite universities, thinking, for example, of Stanford, have really tried to push doctoral programs, especially in the humanities, to think more creatively about how doctoral work gets produced and disseminated. For example, not using multi-hundred-page thesis papers to demonstrate capacity and knowledge and skill within the discipline, but maybe to implement digital tools and other methods that would be more reflective of societal norms, but also reflective of individual capacity within the discipline. And yet, what do we see around the world? Very little change. There's been almost no change in the majority of universities and the majority of doctoral programs in that regard. And I worry that same level of distance will be put between doctoral programs and new technologies and new ways of producing and disseminating knowledge. And I think that's detrimental to doctoral students, because the more we, as senior academics and established scholars in the field, in our fields, hold on to traditions that are not completely reflective of current reality, the more we hold our students back. And that means the more we hold our disciplines back. And I think, the only way to deal with that balance between ethics and progress is to deal with evaluation frameworks. What are we really looking for when we're evaluating the work of a PhD student? I think if we were to really articulate it carefully and slowly and clearly, we're going to find that some of the things that we think are the markers, such as the way a paper is written, or the way research findings are demonstrated in a short 15-minute conference talk, are not exactly emblematic of the bigger skills that we all probably believe need to be exhibited in order for our disciplines to flourish now and in the future. And so I think if we were to re-envision the criteria and the frameworks to evaluate PhD student progress and accomplishment, we go quite far in balancing the ethics with the questions of progress.
I think on that thread, I might want to also ask you, how much of the onus is on the institution? Because let's face it, doctoral students obviously come to us at a level of maturity which we don't expect from undergraduate students, right? Or even sometimes master's students, postgraduate. But at the maturity and the knowledge that they're already coming in with, how much of this responsibility do we really give to institutions, that they have to equip the doctoral students with these skills, such as ChatGPT or any of the other Gen AI tools?
Well, my view is actually that it's not the institution directly. Obviously, the institution has a role in it, but as any academic administrator in the world can tell you, faculty members don't necessarily listen to their institutions for guidance. they're really guided, and appropriately so, by their disciplinary communities. And that's essential because it's really about the commodity of our scholarly work on the market, either for academic jobs, for selling our ideas to our peers, or translating our ideas into something that can be commercialized or put into the public sphere. And it's how we, in that disciplinary community, adjudicate papers and judge the quality of work that gets out there in our journals, in our conferences, and so forth. And so I put it on the disciplines themselves and the disciplinary communities, the disciplinary associations, to play a bigger role in defining that for their fields of study. And then the institutions, which largely I think want to be more proactive about these issues, then the institutions will have an easier time moving forward. They most certainly, appropriately so, have to be subjugated to the peer review mentality of a discipline. The disciplines have to move forward.
Have to move forward. Such an excellent point. Thank you so much, Dr. Ted. Now we move to Dr. Wilkinson. So we want to get a little bit more into specific examples. Given your expertise in the geological engineering and environmental science areas, how do you foresee generative AI, particularly, let's say, for instance, image generation, manipulation, revolutionizing laboratory experiments, data analysis for doctoral students? And maybe following on from that, what potential do you see for enhancing accuracy and efficiency of experimental research?
Okay. So I'll start just by talking about the recent work that I've done with AI within one of the modules. And I asked students, there was already a literature review within the module. I asked students to use AI however they wanted in order to enhance their
Nice.
And then I gave them 20% of the mark for an appendix which explained how they used AI and how it helped them or how it hindered them in the production of that work. So it was like a critical evaluation of AI within the production of a literature review. And there were three things that they came up with. There was one AI tool that they used which summarized a journal article. So you put the journal article in and it gives you a summary so they can read through that and then sort of get an idea of which papers are relevant to them. Then the next thing they found from ChatGPT that you could get a really nice outline. And the detail, it didn't really help with. As you started trying to get into the detail and asking more and more detailed questions, eventually you hit a wall where it says, this I don't know about, or something to that level. And the final one was images, and this goes to the point. The images that they generated were things that you could put on the sides of PowerPoint slides, like general images around the subject. But if you wanted a specific scientific diagram explaining a process, then it was uncertain what was produced, and they would have to error check, and there was more effort to do that than to generate the diagram based on what they'd understood. For experimental work, AI would be perhaps useful in designing an experiment. The carrying out, if it's in a laboratory or in the field, and that's got to be done based on your understanding, based on your ability to observe. Yes. And then when you've got data, that data analysis can be aided through AI. But you would need to really be certain that it is producing an analysis of that data. You need to understand what it had done.
You need to understand the data first.
In order to know that it's a relevant or is a real outcome from that data. Otherwise, there are risks that it could create some really biased results from data input by combining it with other things.
And of course, the moment we're talking about data input, then what Professor Yunus said about privacy concerns for data would be...
I'm talking about lab data. And in engineering, that's They're concrete as very little privacy issues.
So if we just go back to that point about these are all the positives that we have seen, and in fact what you said about them being able to get an outline and then working from that on their own. As doctoral students, I'm wondering how important is it for a student to be able to come up with an outline versus just using the outline that ChatGPT has given?
I think the biggest issue when it comes to writing is the blank page. So getting the first steps of something really helps you get going.
Right.
And I don't know, if you did it on your own, perhaps it would help you structuring things at another time, but the speed that you gain through getting away from the blank page, I think is of value.
Right. So that given, so we know that that's not something we are concerned about. But then if we think about in terms of the image manipulation capabilities that some of the Gen AI tools now have. And I remember this conversation that I had with one of my closest colleagues from NI, Dr. Shiva, about the impact of image generation, particularly in health sciences, is tremendous. Have you seen any kind of that impact, or do you foresee something like that coming through in your area? Because again, they're STEM, but they're again very different STEM areas.
Yeah, images can be generated. How real are they is the question.
Right.
And I think that you would still need to understand what the image was showing, understand whether it made sense in relation to the process. Most of the things that I would put into my publications will be graphs of data that I produce myself, or pictures of apparatus, or when I go into the field and I have a look at a rock sequence, it's a picture of that rock sequence and the details of it that I'm then describing. When I generate a diagram or something like that, if I were to produce it with AI, I don't know whether it would quite be what I wanted.
That's very interesting. So what kind of, I guess, advice or guidelines should there be in this case when we are thinking of integrity and reliability for experimental results?
Okay, for experimental results, the risk is that you alter your results through using AI generation, and then the results are not real representation of the data. So that's what I was saying in terms of the interpretation, that if you can create a better diagram which is based on your data, then that's fine. If the data is altered by the process, then that is really problematic, because that's falsification of data.
Yes. And do you think students, doctoral students, have that the understanding of where that line is going to be crossed? Or do you think that's still something we need to see a lot more maturity coming into students where Gen AI is concerned?
I don't think we've done any training on that. I hope that doctoral students would not generate data from AI. They would rely on their own data, and if it looked different when they put it through, whether that they would know that there was an issue. But we have not done that training with PhD students, and I think we really should.
So maybe at this point I'll go back to Dr. Ted. So that's a very interesting observation, Dr. Ted, that we don't necessarily cover a point like this in doctoral programs or education. What's your experience been in the various positions that you've held globally?
Well, I think, it's for the past 15 years, I've been working in the Middle East, North African region, in the UAE and Bahrain and Egypt. And I think in many ways, it's refreshing here in that university education. I think there's an ability to experiment more and more openness, because the academic disciplinary guild-like structure that is very controlling of how academic departments and faculty work occur in well-established and long-standing universities. You might not have all of that. You also have a lot more a mobility of faculty, and so I think there's maybe a greater openness to it. That being said, there still is an equitable level of lack of knowledge about tools and how to effectively leverage those tools to not only produce research but to get it out there in the public. And I think my view is that within our academic disciplines, within our scholarly communities, the more we see examples, the more we try out different ideas with each other, and especially, and this is most important in the doctoral realm, the more that really well-regarded institutions and well-regarded scholars utilize these tools, there's a rubbing off effect on the rest of the discipline. Right. So we really do need to see that AI is accepted and welcomed, but then of course we have to regulate it. We have to think through how we make sure that it is controlled and that we control it to, at the end of the day, the most important thing we want to do is advance our disciplines. And we do that by advancing our own work, right, and our own scholarly reputations. And all of that can work hand in hand. But frequently it's an issue of the stigma of how especially we, write papers, and all of the ideas that Stephen spoke about, I think are really good. I fear that a lot of my colleagues and students might be anxious wherever they are, in whichever institution they are, about whether or not those ideas are acceptable. Right. And so we have to really make sure people feel that we want these kinds of innovations. We want them in boundaries, but we want them nonetheless.
Yes, with guardrails. And I will also quickly touch upon Professor Yunus, because I remember Vera had worked with European Network for Academic Integrity to actually organize ethical guidelines and workshops for doctoral students. And this was, of course, way before Gen AI, the boom that hit us last year. So what are the kind of responses you had from doctoral students after that? Was it like a tube light that went on, or is it like, oh, we knew about these boundaries and we know not to cross these, so this was like a refresher?
Actually, as Ted indicated, there are these academic institutions, associations, they are publishing their ethical guidelines. Right. All over the world. Right. And I think they are very important resources. But as you indicate, we need to change them. Yes. Based on this paradigm shift happening. Right. It's a real paradigm change. It is, yes. And the feedback that we get from students, and we realize that there are many issues needs to be considered when redesigning these ethical guidelines. At the universities and at the academic institutions. Many people think that academic institutions are progressive and liberal institutions, but basically they are not. They are very conservative. Very conservative. Actually, I read an article on interdisciplinarity, and they were citing Derrida from France, and he says that, don't tell me that universities, academic institutions, but by their nature, because we are the gatekeepers of the science. Yes. We have to be careful about, as you indicated, that's what the validity and reliability of the methodologies and the data that we are collecting. Right. I think in this era, we will have courses starting from the bachelor programs on AI literacy and AI prompt engineering and responsible use of it. And one more thing, I think the philosophy courses will be compulsory. Yes. Because technical know-how, we will deal with we will use artificial intelligence to take care of this capacities, but the ethical know-how, the philosophical issues, the existential questions that we are going to face. Human element. Yes. Because AI is different from other technologies that we encountered in the past.
Absolutely. So with that, because we've been talking so much about students, from our doctoral student in the panel, it's an absolute pleasure, of course, to have you as part of this conversation, because I don't think any of these conversations are complete unless we have a student voice in there. As a doctoral student, how has the advent of this Gen AI impacted your research methodology, learning process, overall approach to your dissertation?
Okay, like every other technology that exists today, I believe there are pros and cons to using any technology, and especially when we're talking about generative AI, I would say that there are pros to using it. For example, for non-English speakers like me, for whom English is not your first language. Generative AI is a blessing. It helps us paraphrase. It helps us, really use and understand how to portray our ideas, right? And do really nice, using really good grammar and making sure that
the sentence
interprets
structure
the
comes
sentence
together.
structure and everything like this. But then, we're, as PhD candidates, we're also taught to, that we're taught that research is creativity, it's an art, right? So there are certain things that generative AI cannot really do. So like how, Dr. Wilkinson rightly said that it can summarize articles, which is a blessing, because as a doctoral student, we are meant to read hundreds and thousands of articles. And but we're also taught to critique those articles. We're taught to critique methodologies. We're taught to synthesize literature. We're taught to identify and find gaps for which further research is needed. And I think that's where generative AI somehow lacks. It can help us summarize. It cannot help us critically summarize and synthesize. It can help us write. It cannot help us, develop conceptual frameworks that are so really needed. That's the core. It's at the core of every research, right? To develop frameworks and identify gaps and things like this. So these are the things that I think generative AI is lacking behind in currently.
Okay. Would you be able to maybe share any specific instances where Gen AI tools may have significantly altered or enhanced either your or from what you have observed from fellow classmates' academic work?
Yeah. So initially, when generative AI did come into being, the interesting thing was it was just text-based, so it was like having a teacher on hand 24 hours a day. It's ubiquitous. And I think it just created a nice, meaningful learning environment because you can ask any simple questions when your supervisors are not available. Like, can you explain this particular methodology? What are the drawbacks? What are the benefits of using this methodology in any particular research? And now we see that it has evolved into a multimodal phase. So generative AI is not unimodal anymore. It also allows us to, upload PDF documents. It allows us to analyze data. It creates these images and these graphs for us. And I think it has somehow made things easier, but also very challenging, because we don't know where that data has come from. And very interestingly, this really got me thinking when you said that students can actually ask generative AI to come up with data. And then that made me think, that just defeats the purpose of doing a PhD then, right? Because we're being taught to gather primary data and then analyze it. And then just the fact that generative AI can do these things really makes me question the whole purpose of doing a PhD.
Okay. Looking forward, how do you anticipate these kind of tools will influence your field of study and your career trajectory post-graduation?
So I think there are ethical implications involved. When it comes to gathering primary data, we're gathering it from human participants, right? It's not our data, it's their data that we're using for our research. And then if we're using their data and we're going to input it into generative AI tools, we ideally want to inform them that, your data, because you rightly said that it trains on itself, right? It's machine learning. It learns on the data that is being fed into it. And it learns from user interactions. So I think just the fact that we're using human participant data and we're inputting that data into generative AI makes us more, it makes me want to feel that we have to be more concerned about these participants whose data is being fed into generative AI, because they might not want that. They might not want their data to be fed into generative AI. And I also feel that the whole process of ethics approval is going to get a lot more stringent now, because they might want us to be, they might want us to inform the university and the ethics committee that we're using generative AI for the purpose of analysis and for the purpose of writing and things like this. And that will need to be reflected in consent forms and participant information sheets.
Right.
So
but how practical do you think it will be for the level of acknowledgement that is currently expected by most institutions, I think? Let us know what prompt you've given, give us a screenshot of what what the answer was and how have you used it. To the extent of when you generate a thesis of say 100, 200, 300 pages, how practical would it actually be to have that expectation of a doctoral student to give that kind of evidence of use of a tool?
It would be very important, I feel. It would be very important, because when you're talking about upholding academic integrity, this is also a big part of academic integrity, right? For students, especially when you're in an educational space, So I think it's absolutely okay to expect that level of
scrutiny.
Yeah, of that whole level of expectations that you want to seek in a student is fine. And also, very interestingly, I'm seeing that as of now, there are not many universities that are taking a stance on the use of generative AI. And I think as a student, I would want to see that, right? Because if the university is not informing the student whether or not it's okay to use generative AI, it puts us in a very fuzzy space, right? And then a lot of these students will actually use generative AI. So I think I am now seeing journals that are taking a stance. They're saying, okay, they're embracing the AI as a tool, and they're saying it's okay to use it as long as you're using it responsibly.
Right.
And I think universities should also start taking a clear stance, and informing students about this.
So what I'm hearing is definitely there is a responsibility on the student, but for sure those guidelines need to be made more clear. And they need to be more open and explicit rather than just have the students figure themselves out, even if they're at the doctoral level.
Yes, especially if they're at the doctoral level.
Especially at the...
Because we're the future researchers,
What ethical considerations do you think are most critical for emerging scholars? So beyond your doctoral studies, you are already a published author.
Okay.
And you are publishing. You're quite prolific with publishing. So for emerging scholars like yourself, what are the kind of ethical considerations do you think should be addressed when using Gen AI?
I think, again, it boils down to how the data is being used, right? Where the data is coming from, how it's being used, and how it's being analyzed. So I think once we have clear policies and clear frameworks,
or we cannot do.
Yes, of what we can do, what we should not do, I think then we'll be much more sorted, in a very sorted zone.
All right, we are almost out of time. At this stage, I'd like to circle back to the experts, starting off with Professor Yunus, to ask, looking ahead, the question is for all three of you, what do you perceive as the long-term implications of Gen AI on doctoral education, research practices? Particularly concerning ethical considerations, things that we've talked about today, academic integrity, and most importantly, development of critical thinking skills among the doctoral students. Professor
There are
Yunus.
so many issues, but one of them I would like to talk about is authorship. Maybe I should ask you. Because Ted gave a very interesting example.
About a co-author.
At the Generative AI as the second author. Why not the first one? I don't know. What about doctoral studies? What are we going to do with the thesis? Are we going to add as a second advisor or reviewer, or because I know so many colleagues, editors are using artificial intelligence to review the articles.
Oh, wow.
Yes. We are in that process.
Yes.
And authors are editing their article based on the feedback they are getting
from that. So it's a circular economy we've created for OpenAI.
Yes, I think there are these authorship, so many issues, but I just wanted, since
would be
our time is
authorship.
limited, I want to focus on authorship. And I saw many articles.
Like that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Indicating
Bless.
ChatGPT as the second author, yes.
Okay. Dr. Ted?
Previously I talked quite a bit about what I think are the needs of pushing forward, the advancement of these technologies in doctoral education. I think what I would foresee in the future is potentially a problem that we can avoid if we're very careful about it. And that problem is that the reality that, as we've all talked about in various ways in the past hour, that our expertise is socially mediated. It's socially mediated because people, governments, businesses, employers trust what we do, and we adjudicate that. We mediate the methods by which we produce and disseminate knowledge, and taking peer review as one example. That's a very carefully constructed way to assess inside our community, our disciplinary communities, what we do and how we do it and the quality. And I think there's always a need to keep that up and to make it really paramount to everything that we do, to make sure that our work is respected in society. And I think there's a huge risk with artificial intelligence. Too many mistakes, too many ethical breaches, too many falsified reports. Too many papers that didn't really make sense because the author didn't really put a lot of his or her own effort into it. Right. All of those things, even piecemeal, will erode confidence in academia, and we have to really work hard to prevent that.
Fantastic. Dr. Stephen?
Let me expand on that in engineering. So let's say that someone created data for testing of a material, and at peer review, we would read the methodology. We would see that the data came from the methodology. We don't check that. So it would pass peer review, and that could easily be published. Now, when would it be picked up? I mean, it's a novel material, so perhaps someone tries to build something with it. And the hope, let's say, aeronautical engineering, they try and make something for an aeroplane. Yeah. It'll be picked up at the quality stage, most likely. It's
hopefully,
not going to cause harm other than economic loss. But then the engineering companies, once they start finding, this science is not reliable, it then lowers the standards for what can you trust. You then have to have companies doing in-house research in order to make their own materials. It moves away from the ability to rely on university research.
Right.
And that can happen just with a few bad papers. Meaning that the whole subject becomes unreliable.
Right.
It's really, really risky because it's something that the peer review process cannot pick up.
No.
This potential for falsified data. So I'm hopeful that ethics will ensure that does not happen. But there is this risk if we do not embed this ethical culture behind research in engineering.
Right. Wow. With that, we come to the end of our third Academic Integrity Conversation podcast. We hope our audience gained insights into research and academic integrity and how it might be impacting doctoral students. I take this opportunity to once again thank Professor Mustafa Yunus, Dr. Ted Purinton, Dr. Stephen Wilkinson, of course, Ms. Vidhi Sharma, for joining me, Zeenat Reza Khan, in today's conversation. Thank you.